Welcome. We've got a new YouTube channel. It's called New Hickory for America. We picked that name because we love Andrew Jackson. In the history of the United States, he is our only president to completely pay down the national debt. So this website, we're going to post weekly, maybe twice a week. We're going to cover current events, but we're going to come from a perspective of how the events that we're given to through our mass media are really controlled from behind the scenes by our Federal Reserve. We have a monster in this country. We have a monster that influences everything we hear, everything we read, and everything we see. I wouldn't be surprised if they affect what we smell. This monster is called the Federal Reserve. And if we're going to survive as a nation, we need to end the Federal Reserve and create an honest banking system that's built for the benefit of the citizens, not for the benefit of the bankers. So watch for us. We're going to be covering a lot of different issues. We hope to bring you a new perspective. And we'll always tie it in to our Federal Reserve that must be destroyed. Just as Andrew Jackson destroyed the second bank of the United States, the central bank of his time in the 1830s. So this week's episode, we're going to talk about the debt ceiling. It's current. It's going on right now in July 2011. Why now? Do you know since 1913, when the Federal Reserve was started, the debt ceiling's been raised 74 times. Started off at 0, spiked up during World War I, spiked up again during World War II, spiked up again during Vietnam, and then really from Reagan till now, it's been on kind of a steady course, up and up. So now our national debt's roughly $14.5 trillion. Even though during the Bush administration, everyone in Congress voted for the debt ceiling 7 times, the debate hardly ever took more than an hour. Now all of a sudden, people have got religious about the debt. And we've got the debt ceiling debate. You know, they telegraphed this in January. They told us in the news, watch out this spring for conflict between the Obama administration and the Congress regarding the debt ceiling. They did nothing in March and April, so Timothy Geithner at Treasury had to come up with an idea to put a Band-Aid on the problem. They've decided to raid the federal pension benefit plans. So all the money that's typically set aside on a weekly and monthly basis to fund federal pensions is now being lifted, stolen, and used for day-to-day operations. By August 2nd, the amount of money that Treasury has taken from the pension funds will be about $300 billion. So on top of our debt ceiling problems and our deficit problems, that $300 billion is going to have to be paid back at some point. Now, speaking about the national debt ceiling, right now the national debt's roughly $14.5 trillion. Let's say we raise it $1.5 trillion to $16 trillion. We would be able to fund all the government spending for another year with the revenues we have. Clearly, cuts have to be made, and we need to have an honest budgetary process, which we don't have in Congress right now. But for now, we need to raise the debt ceiling. Do you know that since middle of March, the day-to-day cash operations of the Treasury and Secretary Geithner have been made by raiding federal pension funds? They actually go in and take the cash that was there, and then each and every week, when they get cash in on revenue streams, instead of setting money aside to fund the pension funds, they spend it on other programs. By August 2nd, the total money lifted or stolen from our federal pension funds is going to be about $300 billion. So you can add that on to the problems we have. That money has to be paid back, or people that are planning on a retirement won't have it. So let's say a family had a debt of $14,500, and their income each month was $1,700. Would you really want to bankrupt that family out? Would you want to just have them default and end the game? Or would you want to extend the debt a little bit and try to restructure things and help them in their spending practices, show them how to budget their money, and help them eventually pay their creditors back? Raising the debt ceiling right now is not a huge number. It's not the problem. The problem is the political climate in our capital. And even a larger problem is the fact that we're watching people that have no control really over the process. Members of Congress and members of the Obama administration do not control money supply. They do not control interest rates. They do not control lending policy. Our currency, our economic policy in this country is controlled by private bankers. They don't care about the country. They're run for profit. They're a private corporation. What's the definition? What's the reason? What's the interest of a private corporation? To make profit and to gain control. Aside from the obvious, the time has run out. We're being screwed on a daily basis by politicians that are completely worthless. Do we need any more press conferences from Obama telling us that he might get a deal done? Let me give you an example of how worthless and ineffectual these people are. They don't even talk about actually reducing the debt. They're talking about reducing the deficit. So let's say the debt's $14.5 trillion. And the next year the budget's going to have a $2 trillion deficit, which would raise the debt to $16.5 trillion. All they're talking about doing in these 6-year plans and these 10-year plans is reducing the deficit. Next year they'll be at the same thing. They'll just pass new legislation that forgets about these promises, and the debt will continue to skyrocket. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you get married, and when you get married your spouse weighs 100 pounds. And you think this is fantastic. Athletic, shapely, very fit. The first anniversary, your spouse weighs 150 pounds. No big deal. You go on. Second anniversary, 200 pounds. So you go out jogging together, you play tennis together, you watch what you eat, you cook at home. Third anniversary, 250 pounds. That's it. You guys sit down, you go to counseling, you talk it over. Your spouse comes to you with a plan, says, look, I know you're worried about my weight. I know you're not happy about the weight I've gained. So let me tell you, I've got a deficit reduction plan. I've got a plan to reduce my weight by 50%. You're thinking to yourself, well, this is fantastic. 50% of a 250 is only 125. That's almost back to the weight when we got married. That's how a logical person would think. But a politician thinks like this. They have been gaining 50 pounds a year. So a 50% reduction for the next year would mean they've gained 25. So your spouse is still going to go from 250 to 275, and in their mind, they've lost 50% of their weight. That's how they lie to us. Remember that as an example. Tell your friends that that's what politicians are doing to us. They don't actually reduce the true number. They reduce the future debt by a few points and call it a deficit reduction plan. And then what do they do 5 years later when they get to the point where the big cuts are supposed to kick in? They just redo the legislation and spend more money. Have you ever watched a congressional hearing? They're limited to 5 minutes in most congressional hearings. So all the witness has to do from the Pentagon or from the Bush administration or the Obama administration or the TSA or the Department of Homeland Security is not answer the question for 2 minutes. Then the congressperson restates the question. Then they don't answer the question again, and then there's time's up. One of the things that has to be reformed if we're going to survive as a country is congressional hearings have to have teeth. They have to ask good questions, and by God, you're going to answer the question. Because the Congress is the people's representatives in Washington. When that congressman asks a question from somebody from the Department of Homeland Security about the TSA operations in our nation's airports, we as a people need that question answered. We need to pass legislation or just some rules. Listen, you come to the Congress, you don't answer the question, we're going to hold you in contempt. We'll put you in the big house for 45 days so you can loosen up your teeth. We need these questions answered. That's one thing we could work on. Getting back to the debt ceiling debate. Why now? Why is it in the news this summer? The Federal Reserve is run by very wealthy, very greedy, power-hungry people that, unbeknownst to me and a lot of other people, are hell-bent on destroying the middle class of America. They used the Baylor Bankout Bill in 2008. They used credit card rules. They used bankruptcy rules. They've used the housing debacle. They've used a lot of things to further weaken the American family. And this summer, they've picked the debt ceiling debate. Legislation will come through. More than likely, it'll give more power to the bankers, and it'll put more of a tax burden on families that can barely pay their taxes now. And why is this being done? As hard as it is to believe, they truly do want to destroy America.
It kills me not to know this, but I've all but just forgotten what the color of her